Picked up a couple of new subscribers along the way. Thank you. Pull up a chair, have a seat. Welcome, and thank you for subscribing. Now let's get on with it. Let me be clear before we get started that I'm dealing primarily with what they call the big three of American automobile manufacturers: General Motors, Ford, Chrysler. Or I'll throw in a little AMC just because. And I want to be clear that everybody can accidentally get it right once in a while. There'll be people that you hear from that any vehicle, year, make, model. I had one of those. It was a great car. You can accidentally get something right from time to time. Just like companies that are known for quality and long-lasting durability, like your Toyotas and your Hondas, can accidentally get it wrong. Something rolls off the line, it's got problems from the very get-go, and oh, those are junk. And I get it, I understand that. It can go both ways. I had a friend in school who picked up an old Honda Civic and drove it like it was a NASCAR, and I think the thing was probably putted around like a grandma before he got it. You do that with any vehicle. I mean, all he lacked was the net on the driver's side window, while he was driving it. You do that with almost any vehicle, you're going to have problems. So it can go both ways, I understand it, but let's get into it. In the 1950s, automobile manufacturers in America pretty well had her figured out. And they made massive luxury boats made for cruising where you didn't even feel the road, man. I'm talking them things, trunk, back seat, front seat. Them things were bigger than Oprah Winfrey's panties and Alex Jones's mouth combined. Massive, massive cars. Gasoline it wasn't free, but it was a non-factor. You just threw gas in it to keep it going. And by and large, I mean, they'd had some problems, but you'd get about 70,000, 80,000 miles before the thing was just almost junked out. And what happened to all those vehicles? A lot of them ended up in Cuba, and they're driving them to this day because of that embargo. But that's another story. We might get into that another time with Cuba. In the 1960s, you had massive power, hot rods. It was the glory days of the American automotive, manufacturing. Power muscle cars. And even if they came relatively stock, they swapped out the wheels on them, put something cool on there and some raised white letter tires, man, and it was about power and horses and what do you got and the cars were easy to work on. I'm old enough to remember anything that was involved, not even involved, spark plug change. I could crawl in, I'm 6'3", and I could crawl inside the engine bay and sit relatively comfortable and sit on the fender and change out the spark plugs. That's how much room these things had in them. You could work on them. Then came about 1973 in the fall, and came an oil embargo. And we got a problem now with the OPEC countries not producing as much oil. Well, of course, that drove up prices. Gasoline became a concern. Now, it became a budgetary concern if you could get it. A lot of stations limited gas supplies to 10 gallons. That's all you could buy. And then they even had, I think it was a national deal where the license, it depended on your license plate. And you got gasoline on Monday and Wednesday and Friday if you needed it. And everybody else got Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. It's a mess, man, an absolute mess. And that lasted, I think, till about 1980. 7 years of Mickey Mousing around with who could get gasoline, how much, and when. As a result of that, the government, in its infinite wisdom, as I've covered, you might be catching on now. I'm not really a fan of the U.S. government because of their boneheadedness over and over and over. But they stepped in and required vehicle manufacturers to make vehicles that got better miles per gallon. That's also where we got the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on the interstate. I mean, if you don't mind taking 7 days to get, 300 miles, then there's no problem with the speed limit. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So American car manufacturers were they were forced into making these changes to get better gas mileage, in theory, and to make a safer, not a more reliable car, but a safer car. They had to do things like seat belts. there's a novel idea. You know, maybe the head doesn't mash into the windshield so quickly. And bumpers. Well, the initial thing was a 5-mile-per-hour bumper. You know, basically when you're parking the vehicle, it could bump and take that. And that was all you got. They weren't going to do anything that they didn't have to do, required by federal law. Because changes cost money. In the 1970s, especially from about the time of that embargo, they loaded down these engines with more restrictive crap and built junk vehicles. A lot of the engineers knew it. It wasn't like it was accidents and these things slipped out. They knew it was junk, and they went to the executives, and the executives basically said, are we ready for rollout? They took stuff from the drawing room and manufactured it and sent it out the door. You had crap like the Sunfire, the Monza, the Caprice, the Vega. The Vega, 6 out of 7 Vegas produced in America were total recalls within 2 years. 6 out of 7. Junk. The Chevy Citation, the Cavalier, the Cimarron. Ford was doing it too. You know, they rolled out the lovely Pinto, and we all know about the Ford Pinto. You know, I would assume that a bee lands on the back bumper and the thing explodes into flames, and it wasn't that bad. But you did, if they were hit at a certain angle, the things would ignite. They looked at all the cases of deaths by combustion from being rear-ended at this certain angle that caused it. And they looked at the legal fees, and they said, well, it's cheaper to pay the legal fees from the lawsuits and just settle with these families of people that we've killed and maimed from having a faulty product. It's cheaper to do that than to go back and relocate the fuel tank in the back of the car and maybe put some rubber lines on it instead of metal lines so that things don't explode. So we'll just pay them off. They never did improve it. Never. Dodge had wonderful products like the Aspen, the Volare, which was a Plymouth, the same thing, Dodge Plymouth. Just absolute junk. And they were near bankruptcy by 1979. Had Lee Iacocca not stepped in and retooled everything and kind of saved the day, they would have been defunct then. AMC stepped into got into the game. They had the Gremlin and the Pacer. And if you've seen Wayne's World, you know what the Pacer is. The flying fishbowl, the greenhouse on wheels, Let's just make it out of glass. I don't see the downside of that. They were, it wasn't a few years. I think the French company Renault got in, what we'd say Renault. That's how it's spelled. Bought them out in the early to mid 80s, I think, and then they just discontinued it altogether. They're just trash. They also jumped into the motorcycle market, AMC did. Built a stretch of Harley Davidsons, which were the worst bikes they ever made. Congratulations. Ford had the Capri, the Granada, the Mercury Monarch, Mercury's Ford. Some of the worst vehicles that ever came off the line. And a lot of the surveys that came out of that time, especially with General Motors, I mean, you can go back and trace this down. The radio might quit working within a month of purchasing the car. The air conditioner would be shot easily within a year. It's like, why even... Let me read you this. Wobbling suspension, the aforementioned radio and AC, shuddering brakes, worst carburetors ever, horrible brake lines and handling. Some of the rear brakes would just lock up for no apparent reason when you're driving down the road. Now you're dragging your back tires. General Motors went so far as to make a little mini documentary and blame the American consumer. Because in the meantime, the foreign manufacturers, especially the Asian ones like Toyota and Honda, what were some of the other ones? Mazda, Nissan, Datsun, made horribly ugly cars, but then they were just practically bulletproof. You turned the key and started up and went, and they ran 3/4 of forever. So this General Motors documentary blamed you, blamed Americans. Why would you do this? This wouldn't be a problem if you'd stop buying their cars. You know what? The trouble with that is people wouldn't have been buying Asian-made cars. if the American companies would have built a quality product. General Motors just kept skating on through, well, they all did, really, all of them, the American manufacturers. I read a book, I want to say it was on Ross Perot, and he got involved. He was, kind of sort of rumored he was going to take over, maybe, General Motors and get things straightened out up there. And what he realized it was beyond straightening. The executives had their own level, their own floor of one of the buildings. They had their own cafeteria, separate from the engineers and the designers and the manufacturers. It was this total aloofness, this arrogance. We're a little better than you. By the time we got to 2008-9 and the economy's crapping out, the big three went hand in hand to Washington, D.C. to ask for bailouts for their company. The best one of a sorry lot was Ford, who wanted the money as an insurance protection. They didn't actually use it to save their company. They just wanted to make sure that it was there if they needed it. Well, they decided to turn it into a publicity for their new run-of-the-top-of-the-mill vehicles. And I can't remember what the makes and models were, but GM, Ford, and Chrysler drove to Washington, D.C. rather, from Detroit, Michigan, rather than fly on the executive, plane, the jet. The Dodge vehicle was so poorly made. This is a brand new vehicle now. They loaded the thing down with tools. They had CB radios in the vehicle, and 3 other Dodge vehicles followed them, loaded to the gills with tools, in a brand new vehicle to drive from Detroit, Michigan to Washington, D.C., touting how great their product was because they were scared to death the thing was going to break down on the way there. In a brand new vehicle. They had no problem selling it to you for top dollar, but they knew that they were rolling out crap. And shortly after these bailouts, they got their money. Of course they did. Shortly after these bailouts, I remember General Motors having a commercial and saying, "Come on back, give us another chance." Why would we? How much money do you think Americans have to spend on vehicles? I mean, yeah, we sold you a piece of junk, and we knew it was a piece of junk when we sold it to you, but give us another chance. The Asian manufacturers, all the while, were improving their product. And then when it became a thing of reliability, yeah, the car's ugly, the Celica, the Camry, they're ugly as the most violent sin, but the thing's been running for 300,000 miles. I turn the key and she starts right up and I go. Even then, the Asian manufacturers listen to the American market. Well, let's make the styling a little better. Let's make it look a little better. Growth through slow, gradual implementation of products. Tweaking a little bit here and there. Not gigantic overhauls with unproven technology and all that jazz. A little bit here and there and here and there. Making an outstanding product. So now news comes down the pike that they're going to go to the EVs, We're going to make electric vehicles. The same people that couldn't make a radio in a brand new vehicle last a month, or an air conditioner last more than a year and a half, and that was the 70s. The 80s didn't get a lot better. The 90s, they did turn out some good, all of these companies turned out some fair trucks along the way, except for maybe Dodge. But there's people that would argue with me over that, and that's fine. But these same companies, like General Motors, for example, has a long history of terrible electronics. You're going to make us an electric vehicle. Really? And you've seen reports, if you've watched it at all, they're burning down, just charging overnight. They're not even being driven. They burn the whole house down, burn the car down, It's a tale of arrogance and just doing the bare minimum and not doing that well. And the Asian companies doing the exact opposite, bit by bit, incrementally. Anybody that works on a Toyota line at any time in the process, this is down on the floor now where they're actually building things. Anybody can pull the line and stop the whole process if they discover a problem. They have a term for it, I can't remember it, a Japanese term, but it's basically continuous improvement. It's very, very important to them to make a quality product. And I swear by Toyota, the last vehicle I had for 14 years, I got it used. I worked the tar out of that truck. Very minimal, a couple coil packs, I think a power steering pump, just almost nothing. I spoiled rotten owning that vehicle. So I bought another one, exactly like it, 2001. You can't go wrong with quality. They call it the malaise era of American auto manufacturing. There's all kinds of videos here on YouTube and all kinds of information you can look up if you're interested in it. I thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. I'll see you next time.